In Lesson 2 of this section, you learned about grief as part of the solution to the trauma, the grief process, and how grief can be good and move you forward in your healing, or bad and keep you stuck. However, grieving and cleaning out past traumas does not have to take a long time. The problem with childhood trauma and pain is that it often gets frozen and left unprocessed. The exercises in this lesson can help you heal painful memories more quickly. Exposure therapy and integration therapy is a proven method of helping to resolve trauma. As Christians, we also know that God is our healer and will meet us in the process with His love and healing grace as we allow Him to complete the emotional surgery that we need. So I will now explain the specific steps for you to take in cleaning out your past trauma and emotional wounds. Each phase will require you to set aside time to write and work through your feelings, so you will need to come back to this section for details on each phase as you work on them. For now, we will walk through all the phases so you can see the details and where things are going. The phases and examples are also included in your note-taking and activity guide for this lesson, and there's an additional template for this process that you will also find linked below. As you prepare to write your trauma narrative, or narratives about past experiences and events, I encourage you to pray and ask God to begin to prepare you in advance for the time you are setting aside. Ask Him to work by His Holy Spirit to bring out the details and feelings needed for you to heal and for your heart to be open to what He wants to do and to help you to receive it. Most trauma, adverse events, or emotional wound narratives will require several sessions of writing to complete. The speed at which you will progress will be determined by your comfort level, the amount of detail you share, and your personal judgment. After completing each section, read it out loud to yourself and imagine God the Father or Jesus listening to it with empathy and support as you do. If you have questions about how to best write your trauma narrative or narratives for your specific situation, please post your questions in the private community or ask them on a coaching call as you go. I am here to support you during this important step. As an important reminder, writing your trauma narratives can be emotionally draining, especially when exploring new territory. I encourage you to plan blocks of time in advance to work on them, and be sure to leave plenty of time after a writing session to decompress and regain composure, or plan activities for self-care that allow you to have time for rest. In past lessons, you have had the opportunity to identify specific events or kinds of trauma you experienced in your past. Often, there is a specific trauma or event that people recognize as being the most powerful to focus their first trauma narrative on. However, sometimes there is an event that represents more than one event, or trauma, or loss, best, and not one specific event. If that is the case for you, you can pick an event or combine a set of experiences into one to focus your narrative on. If you have experienced multiple traumatic incidences, adverse events, or emotional wounds, it is good to spend some time considering what experiences or events to include in your narratives as you begin. If needed, you can write more later and cover more ground, but it is often important to select key events that you remember having the greatest impact on you. Instead of writing a single narrative, you might also choose to write a life narrative or something closer to a timeline of significant incidents that can help you to hone in on one or two particular experiences to start writing your narrative. The process can sometimes feel messy at first, and it is not always necessary to find the one best memory to begin. As you begin the process, you can trust God to lead where it needs to go. I am also happy to explore the best approach with you in our coaching calls. Also, in your note-taking guide is a sample narrative for you to review to get a sense of how to write your narrative as you get started with the process. Phase 1 of your trauma narrative is to start with the facts. Your first retelling of your trauma, adverse event, or emotional wound story should focus on the facts of what happened. Write like a reporter about the who, what, when, and where of the traumatic experience. Further thoughts, and focusing on feelings, can come later. But start by being as specific and detailed as you can in describing the experience, taking as much time and space as you need and to be thorough. You can describe sights, sounds, sequences of events, the people present, etc. Be specific and clear. You can set aside time to write it all at once or in pieces if you need to, depending on your circumstances or how you feel, but be as thorough as you can. If the facts are too difficult to get out, break things down further and write separate entries about what happened before, during, and after the trauma, adverse event, or emotional wound. When completing your trauma narrative, I highly encourage you to write it out by hand. Writing by hand activates the creative part of your brain where trauma is typically stored in greater ways and is generally more beneficial. However, if you feel strongly that typing your narrative is more helpful for you, that is fine too. Phase 2 is adding thoughts and feelings. After writing about the facts of the trauma, adverse event, or emotional wound, it's time for you to revise and add more detail. Slowly read through the narratives you have written so far and add more information about the specific thoughts and feelings you experienced during the trauma or events that you might have missed the first time. Revisions to the facts are also acceptable during this part of the process if you think you need to. Write as much detail as you can about the thoughts and feelings you are having, allowing yourself to identify, express, and explore feelings as they arise or as you remember them. Avoid challenging or critiquing any of your thoughts or reactions for now and simply explore your thoughts and feelings in any key areas of the experience. But don't worry about digging down too deep in any one area just yet. That will come next. Phase 3 is to start digging deeper. As you become more comfortable with writing about and telling your story, begin to focus on the more uncomfortable or difficult parts of the experience or events. In this phase, focusing on writing about and sharing your worst memory or the worst moments or your worst feelings of the trauma, adverse event, or emotional wounds as you remember it. Dig deeper in this area by adding as much detail as possible to your narrative, filling in anything you missed so far, or new memories or feelings you have identified. In this section, if this section is difficult, it's okay to move slowly and come back to it. You don't want to rush this process, but allow God to use it and speak to you in the midst of it. Spend time reviewing what you have already written and allow yourself to add more details about your feelings and how the situation was experienced for you. Also, as you reflect on your worst memory or moments, write about each of your senses, your sense of touch, taste, smell, and what you saw and heard, and what you were thinking and feeling during the worst moments. Again, be specific about what you felt and what sensations you may have had. During this phase, it is sometimes also helpful to consider adding to your narrative by using a drawing, painting, or collage along with it to express what happened and how you felt. Poetry or writing music or lyrics or other creative things can also help. Using creativity to express your feelings can help the grief process and also help your brain to process the unresolved and unexpressed trauma. Phase 4 is wrapping up your trauma narrative. Now that your narrative has been fully written, come back to it once again at another time and read it and reread it out loud, in detail, until you can sense it being less painful. Revise any sections you see fit as you read it through each time. This part of the process helps your brain to continue to gain perspective on the events and continue to resolve and lessen the impact of the trauma. Phase 5 is adding perspective. Finally, review your story again and go back through it again, only this time, challenge any irrational thoughts or beliefs you think you have had about the experiences. More information about irrational thoughts and cognitive distortions that are created by trauma will be discussed in a later session. But for now, simply ask yourself at this point of the process, if looking back now there are things you think were irrational, unfair, unrealistic, or unreasonable about your view of the experience and what happened, and write down any thoughts you have about this. Sometimes this includes some of the ideas about childhood magical thinking that we discussed in a previous lesson. It doesn't mean that you chose to have irrational thoughts. It was just your reaction at the age you were and to the experience you were having at the time. When trauma and emotional wounds occur for us as children, it is normal to have these reactions and perceptions of the events that are more irrational. Being afraid also creates irrational thoughts for us. This part of the process is a way of gaining additional perspective on how this worked at the time. Finally, phase 6 is current feelings. When you have completed all of the previous phases, write at least one last paragraph about how you feel differently now after completing these exercises, as opposed to when the trauma, adverse event, or emotional wounds were occurring, or before you started the program. Describe what you have learned so far about your trauma. Identify and discuss any ways you have grown stronger. And talk about anything you think would be helpful to say to someone else who is going through the same experience based on what you've learned. To complete your trauma narrative, you can download a Word document template and outline to use as you work through each phase. When you are finished, please post your final narrative in the private community for me, or if you are not comfortable posting it, you can email it to me at dkingglpg@yahoo.com for me to view privately and provide you some feedback. As a final important step to your healing process, once your trauma narrative is complete and submitted, you'll be invited to attend one of the prayer and share transformation sessions. These coaching calls are for those who have completed their trauma narratives and allow a time for sharing your story and receiving prayer and encouragement for your healing and recovery. These are special times for connecting with others and allowing the Holy Spirit to minister to your specific needs as you move forward with the program and your healing journey. This portion of the HOPE program requires the most time as you work on your trauma narrative. Please don't rush and allow yourself to take each step at a pace that fits your situation and makes sense for you, or if you need more time to plan some time to get away to complete it. Please also check back in with questions in the private community or in the weekly coaching calls. In the next lesson, we will review the reflections and additional healing activity suggestions for you to complete before you start your trauma narratives. So please watch lesson 4 before beginning your trauma narratives. I'll see you in the next lesson.